Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Raven, Jinx and Terra. Huge shout out to POKE''BOY24 this story. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so without wasting any time let's get into the video. The sun rose over Jump City, bathing the large city in a beautiful morning glow, as the citizens were either waking up to get ready for their day, or just continued to sleep and rest for the day ahead. But for one person, the ray of sunshine that appeared through the window onto her face forced her to groggily open her violet-colored eyes and glare at the interfering light as she sat up, revealing her nude slender form as her ashen gray skin and messing indigo hair were revealed as the red diamond on her forehead shone within the morning rays as she raised a hand up as it glowed a shining black magical aura which also encased the curtains before they were suddenly pulled close, blocking the light as they were shut fully. Closing her eyes once the annoying task was done, the young woman allowed her head to drop upon the pillow before turning over, only to once again open her eyes as she furrowed her brow in thought as she actually began to take notice of the room she was in. Almost everything she owned was dark in color with various dark shades of blue, black and purple, as those were the colors that she had in her room as she loved those particular color scheme. So why were the curtains black when mine are purple? She mentally questioned as several thoughts were crossing her mind as she noticed the completely different decor within the room, as walls were plain white, with no pictures exempt for the few posters of hot and sexy female characters from Japanese anime. Something which made her blush since she hate to admit, but those monster and demon girls do look pretty attractive, while on the bookshelves were dozens of notebooks, along with dozens of ink bottles and brushes, as she sat up fully and looked towards the window. Using her magic again, she opened the curtains and widened her eyes as she saw the Titan's Tower, her home, standing proudly on the small island across from Jump City. Damn it Raven, just what did you get yourself into? The now revealed Raven mentally cursed upon realizing that she wasn't in her home, before turning her attention towards the door to the room where she saw that it was open, showing another room with a dark orange couch just in her view before taking notice that the bed she was in had a dark wooden frame, as the sheets were a cream color as she pulled them off only to freeze and choke on her breath as she noticed that she was completely naked but couldn't help to take a moment to admire her body. While she may be average in height, her body could still make many normal humans' heads spin as she has a slender frame with a lightly toned physique along with a still growing curvaceous pear-shaped figure as her double D cup bust were firm and full of perk as her dark gray beep were erect, her waist was slim and toned with a smooth flat stomach with slightly visible abs. And her hips were thick and curvy, as her thighs and legs were toned and pretty muscular, while her rear was firm and bubbly. Out of the corner of her eye, the ashen-skinned beauty noticed something that made her freeze up in shock, as her clothes were scattered on the floor, along with another set of clothing in a similar position, as she began taking deep breaths to calm herself, until she heard the sound of deep groaning, as she turned her head, seeing lying next to her, and thankfully still asleep, was the covered form of a man she'd never seen before in her life as she held the sheets close to her body as she began to hyperventilate in panic as she began to understand the situation she was in. Not wanting to risk this unknown man waking up, the young sorceress got out of the bed, her legs feeling slightly numbed with each shaky step on the floor as she quickly gathered her clothes while trying to be as quiet as she could as she slipped on her boots as well put on her cloak, which slightly helped her feel better as her leotard was torn in several places, mostly the front area where her chest and abdomen would be, only to freeze once more when she heard the man behind her begin to move. Turning around, Raven watched as he sat up and stretched his body out with a yawn, with the sheet thankfully still covering his lower half, as well the slight bulge. While she oddly watched the stranger wake up with a blush creeping upon her cheeks as well the tingling feeling building up within her loins as she couldn't help but notice the man's toned muscular built as he wasn't too bulky but more on the athletic side as well the large scar on the left side of his chest as his skin was nicely tanned while his golden blonde hair was a spiky mess along with those whisker-like markings on his cheeks giving him a rough wild look as she blinked while gripping her chest, feeling many of her suppressed emotions calling out to her mind, along with the demonic urges shoving their ways towards the surface, making her gasp and drop to her knees, getting the man's attention as he looked at her in the eyes. They stared, violet eyes meeting deep blue. They were both silent for the longest moment with their eyes locked directly towards the other, Violet staring deeply within ocean blue, as the blue tea was very quiet since she didn't know what to do as she desperately wanted to teleport away, but just couldn't for some reason, as she just kept staring at the handsome blonde before her. It was very obvious that the man was also trying to figure out what to say before sighing. "Would you like some tea or coffee? It will probably help," he offered, not knowing what else to do as Raven just slightly nodded. "If you wait in the next room, I'll be out in a minute," he added with a slight blush since he too was naked under the covers and didn't want her freaking out the moment she sees the monster that he has. Without another word, the young demoness quickly left the room and shut the door behind her, leaving him alone to take care of a little morning disturbance. Now alone, Raven took that moment to calm herself as she took a deep breath before stepping forward, since she could hear some shuffling behind the door as she walked away and deeper into the room, which she quickly identified as an apartment, as it was quite large and spacious, as there was only the large couch as well TV, coffee table, and even a working desk in between the kitchen which had the usual utilities like a fridge, oven, and cabinets. How did I even ended up here? She asked herself as she's holding her head as she sat down on the couch, as she tried to remember everything that happened the night before, but struggled for some reason as many bits seems to be fuzzy. Flashback, the morning before, Raven's POV. I was incredibly annoyed at the moment, for it has been a full stressful week of non-stop battling with random villains that just appear from nowhere as each and every day, some villain or villains would just show up and attack only for me and my teammates to beat them again. It was a routine that was getting boring fast, but thankfully, today seemed to be a day where we could finally be able to catch a little break. However, there was another reason to why I was annoyed, and that reason would be my teammates who seems to be doing everything and anything possible to agitate me, even if they didn't know it. Robin kept pestering everyone to train, not that I wouldn't mind a little leg day, and be on the lookout for possible threats, even if there weren't any. Starfire would bug me about having a girl's day out, which made me shiver at the thought, since the orange-skinned alien girl would probably make me try everything that Earth girls would normally do. Cyborg would constantly ask me to play those stupid videogames whenever I was trying to read a book. And finally, as well most annoying of them all, was Beast Boy, who would constantly annoy me by making terrible jokes after jokes. But in all honesty, I knew they were just being their usual selves, and it was me that was the issue. For some reason, I've been on edge lately, as even the slightest thing has been setting me off without any reason. Meditating usually did the trick by calming my nerves and resetting myself, except now it was doing nothing, since this usually helped keep my emotions in check, since right now they were starting to run wild, along with my powers suddenly feeling stronger, along with my demon urges. Even when I was trying to read another book, my mind just couldn't concentrate as I closed it and lay it on my bed. Now even reading is helping me. I sighed in annoyance before standing up and leaving my bedroom as I headed straight towards the main ops room for a refreshment, where I saw all of my acquaintances gathered in the kitchen before walking over towards the stove where a kettle was sitting as I poured myself some tea, hoping it will help me relax. "Hey Raven, want some breakfast?" I heard Robin speaking to me from the table, but I chose to ignore his question as I wasn't hungry, only to hear the sounds of someone walking up to me from behind. "It's good," I heard Beast Boy exclaim, holding a plate piled high with imitation eggs. "Wakey, wakey, tofu eggs and bakey," the green-skinned changeling sang while munching on a piece of soy. "Herbal tea," I replied with an irritated groan, hoping they would take the hint and leave me alone as I wasn't in the mood. On, the shapeshifter insisted as he held an egg to my face, making my eyebrow twitch as he was pushing my buttons. "Just one little taste, it will help you lighten up, cause, you know, you're moodier than usual." He joked as that did it as I snapped around towards him as I glared at him with my eyes glowing red as my powers were bubbling up. "No." I screamed at him with my voice gaining a demonic undertone as my powers subconsciously pulsed to make the pile of tofu eggs that Beast Boy was holding explode into a huge mess. Everyone stayed quiet as they looked at me in shock, their terrified stares making me quickly leave the room without another word. Flashback over, normal POV. Raven was suddenly broken from her thoughts by the sound of the door opening as she glanced in the bedroom's direction, seeing the stranger closing the door now that the shock of the events was mostly over with. She took a second to take in the stranger's appearance, which she couldn't help but admire as he was now wearing a black t-shirt that hugged closely around his body, showing off his strong-looking physique as well a regular pair of jeans. "Tea or coffee?" he once again asked as he walked over towards his kitchen as his rough-sounding voice slightly startled her. Tea, please," she meekly answered, feeling that strong tingling feeling building up inside her, along with a sudden increase in her body heat. The man nodded before preparing her drink as well, one for himself, which was black roasted coffee, as it only took a couple of quite awkward minutes before he finally sat down on the opposite side of her as she noted that he was keeping a little distance but didn't know if it was to make either her or himself to feel easier. Neither knew what to say to the other, and for good reason too, as the whiskered blonde just sighed once again before finally speaking. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't remember what happened last night," he simply admitted, not having a single clue as to what happened or why both of them woke up in the same bed. That statement caused the bluetie to stare at him in shock, completely surprised by this. "You don't remember?" she asked in a questioning tone while looking away with a heavy blush as she pulled her cloak closer to herself. The man just shook his head at her question. "All I remember was being here and pouring myself a drink," he trailed off, trying to remember what happened the previous night. And then that's it, I can't remember anything else. It's like my memory just stops there." He finished with his eyes closed as he took a sip of his drink. "I don't remember anything either," the demoness lowly said, looking at her tea with narrowed eyes as everything was still fuzzy. "I don't even know your name," she added as she looked away, feeling ashamed that she didn't even know the name of the person she spent the night with or what they've did to make her body feel so good, since, despite the numbness within her lower body, she felt like a lot of pent-up annoyance and irritation she'd been bottling up has been poured out of her half-breed soul. "Sorry about that, my name is Naruto Uzumaki," the now identified Naruto introduced as he glanced at her with a gentle smile, which caused her to scoot closer again the arm of the couch while crossing her legs under her cloak. "And you're Raven of the Teen Titans," he added, to which the sorceress nodded, understanding how he knew of her as she glanced towards the TV. "You can't remember last night either? That's weird," he mused, rubbing his chin, since he had a few one-night stands in the past, but this time when he was taking care of his little problem, it didn't take as long as it usually did. Sipping her tea, humming at the pleasant taste, Raven began thinking about what happened yesterday. "My powers were acting up yesterday, could they be the cause? I know that has happened before, but never like this though," she mused as she thought about her powers as closed her eyes and concentrated. "They're not as out of control as yesterday, at least not even more so than usual." Very odd, she trailed in thought, since what happened yesterday wasn't the type of outburst she had when she was younger. "Listen, Raven," Naruto started speaking, getting her attention. "Because neither of us can remember, I can understand if you don't want to talk about it. I mean, you're a hero, and I doubt you do this sort of stuff regularly," he assured, knowing that whatever might have happened was better left between them. "I don't," she sternly answered, as if scolding herself for what had happened. "And I can agree with what you said about not wanting to talk about what happened. It was a one-time thing, so we don't ever have to talk about it," she added as her cheeks were burning with an embarrassed blush as she squeezed her thighs together, trying to ignore the warm feeling building within her body. "Right, and you don't have to worry about me talking to the news or friends about this. I'll keep this a secret," the Uzumaki promised, giving her a foxy grin, making the ashen-skinned woman give a small smile, feeling thankful that the media wasn't going to know about this, since superheroes were always bombarded and stalked by reporters, which was very irritating. She was very grateful that nobody would ever find out about this, as she's afraid to even think about how her friends would react if they knew what happened, as the thought of their reaction scared her, since the guy would freak and overreact while Starfire would just bombard her with non-stop questions which she still doesn't have the answers to. The female titan's violet-colored eyes suddenly widened as another thought crossed her mind, as it terrified her to no end, as she almost snapped her head towards Naruto, who just raised an eyebrow at her actions before realizing it himself, as his eyes also widened. "If you are wondering if we use protection, don't worry. I found a couple of condom wrappers in my trash bin," he reassured, since the silencing and reinforcement seals he'd place around the bedroom were also active, meaning that what they were doing last night meant that they were doing it very loud and very roughly, while taking a quick glance down towards the outlines of her hips under her cloak, hoping he'd pumped a majority of his loads deep within that big sexy toned ass of hers. Hearing this caused the demoness to release a breath she didn't even knew she was holding, as she was feeling relaxed, knowing that she wasn't impregnated. As well, ignoring the many voices in her head teasingly muttering "not yet anyway," only for her communicator to suddenly go off, making her jump in fright and flashing the whiskered blonde her nude body and bouncing bust, making her badly blush and quickly turning away, pulling her cloak tightly around her body. Taking the device from her belt on the table, she opened it up while walking off to the side. "Hello?" she stutteringly answered as she began talking to whoever was on the other end. Naruto watched as she paced back and forth with a hand on her forehead and her eyes closed, as the expression on her face was quickly changing from embarrassed to looking more annoyed by each passing second. "Alright, I'll be there as soon as I can," she said with a sigh before snapping her communicator shut, since the entire call only took a minute at most. "Let me guess, got to go?" the whisker-faced blonde asked, seeing her stoically nodding towards him. "Yeah, Cinderblock is going on another rampage, again," Raven replied while shaking her head, since that all the stone-based metahuman seems to always be doing. Standing up, the Uzumaki walked over towards his door and opened it for the female titan. "I know this was something that you didn't want to happen, and it must be hard to not remember anything. But if you ever just want to talk," he started talking, but before he could even finish his offer to talk about this at a later date, the blue tea just used her magic and disappeared into the floor with her back still turned to him. "Yeah, I guess not," he finished with a depressed sigh, feeling guilty as though this was somehow his fault, as he closed the door and walked back into his bedroom, as he knelt down next to his bed and pulled out a small box from under the frame. "And here, I had hoped that I could put my past behind me," he whispered to himself as he opened the box, as he stared at his old headband that bared the symbol of his old home. It was now close to midnight as Raven was now in her bedroom back within Titan's tower as she's sitting on the edge of her bed rubbing her temples in annoyance at what happened today. After talking to Naruto, whose name made her twitch a little as well the strange power she could sense within him, she gotten redressed in a new leotard and quickly arrived to see Cinderblock throwing Beast Boy, who was currently in the form of a rhino, was thrown in her direction. Thankfully, the green-skinned teen turned himself back to normal at the last second before slamming into her. After that, anything she would throw at the hulking metahuman would just bounce off of him without leaving a single scratch, as Robin would mostly throw exploding discs towards the behemoth, except they were ineffective as well his bow staff, which snapped after multiple impacts against the villain's dense stone body. Beast Boy could only be able to halt Cinderblock's movements when he was a large enough animal, but eventually would get overpowered and thrown away. Only Starfire could match him in pure psychical strength, holding him down long enough for Cyborg's sonic cannon to being able to knock the behemoth unconscious. Right now, though, as she tries to meditate and take her mind off of everything that had happened, she couldn't help but think about this morning, as she felt terrible just leaving like she did, especially after Naruto was trying to be nice to her and help her. It was all too much though, not remembering the day before, waking up next to a stranger, naked in their bed no less, and trying to make sense of it all was overwhelming. I still don't understand why I can't remember. She questioned to herself with a sigh before getting an idea as she stood up and walked to the middle of her room and sat cross-legged as she began taking a deep breath as she began to float. Azarath Metrian Zinthos Azarath Metrian Zinthos Azarath Metrian Zinthos. She chanted while opening her eyes as they flashed and glowed pure white as she fell into a trance. Snapping her eyes open, Raven knew she was now in her own mindscape as she's looking around the familiar ominous realm as she could easily sense her emotion clones since she doesn't really like talking to them as they just remind her of how she was not allowed to feel because if she felt any type of emotion, then she would lose control of her powers as this was something she'd been doing her entire life. The sound of wings flapping quickly caught her attention as she glances towards her left, where she easily spotted a dead tree planted on a floating rock as a dozen of chibi-looking crows were perched upon the branches as they watched her with their four eerie red eyes. Those things always made her uncomfortable, reminding her too much of her father, but knew that they all came from anger and hoped she won't have to visit that emotion. "Rere!" shouted a joyful version of the halfling's voice coming from behind, making her frown, knowing exactly which emotion it was. Turning around with a sigh, the blue-haired sorceress easily spotted a clone of herself eagerly running towards her with a grin, as the only noticeable difference between them being the color of their cloak, outfit, hair and eyes, as the clone are various shades of pink, as she grunts when the emotion ran up and gave her a very strong bear hug. And for the emotion clones, I'll be using the same style they used in TTG with the personalities like in the episode's Colors of Raven and some of their parts if you've seen those. Happy Raven said in a strained tone as her cheeks were blushing, feeling their beat being squished against each other, as well being glad it wasn't timid since each and every one of her emotions have slightly different physical altercations. "You don't usually wander around here?" she questioned, knowing that this emotion prefers to stay with her happier thoughts. The perky version of her just shrugged her shoulders as she let the original go, not caring about the glare being sent her way. "I was bored, plus I was around the area when you arrived," she simply explained, waving her hand while the other was pressed against her hips as she was slightly more voluptuous in her bust and hip departments, but stopped and blinked before crossing her arms as a thoughtful look appeared on her face. "What are you doing here anyway?" she asked with a raised brow, wondering why her moody outer self would even be visiting. "I need to try and remember what happened last night," Raven bluntly answered, since there was no point in lying or hesitating with her own emotions as they basically know everything she does, but sometimes it did help her thought process when she speaks to them. "Which is why I need to see knowledge, since she'll have the answers I need," she stated as her perky peppy version just made an O face and nodded before covering her mouth as she began giggling as she turned away with a knowing gleam in her eyes. "Guess you want a replay of what that hunky fox did to us, Rere?" The joyful emotion mentally cooed, since she and the others have felt just what that handsome Kitsune done to them before, mentally pouting, wishing that he hadn't used all those stupid condoms since they would have created the cutest babies. "Oh well, plenty more chances to have children," she mentally sang, knowing anger and bravery would love a rematch to be the dominant one next time, while passion would love feeling those strong tender hand groping and massaging every curve of her body, while timid would shake and squirm at the thought of her beep getting bigger than they already were. As Raven began walking in the direction of knowledge's domain, she realized that Happy was traveling along with her as the clone danced around, twirling her arms and shaking her hips while muttering a song to herself. While walking, she'd even noticed that there were a few more crows watching her as they came to a large archway where she focused on knowledge as the entrance lit up as they walked through the portal that opened as they now found themselves within a library of sorts. They both looked around the interior of the building, seeing that was kept perfectly clean with bookshelves lining the walls, looking as though it goes on for miles. "I've expected you to have arrived here sooner," said a calculated voice from above as another version of Raven came floating down in front of the two as this was knowledge, another emotion personality as she has blonde hair tied in a bun with yellow-colored cloak, outfit. And eyes as well being more on the slender side with a slightly smaller bust hip size as well, being more lean in physique as she also wore a pair of thick circular framed glasses, giving her the appearance as a sexy librarian teacher, as a couple of books floated around her as she glanced towards the original without taking her eyes off from the book she was reading. "Ashen is already here waiting. Come, let's get a move on," she instructed as she began walking away as well ignoring the blue tea's confused expression. "Why would Passion be here?" she muttered to herself before blushing as it was clearly obvious and that she'd forgotten already. Knowledge glanced towards her distressed outer self before speaking. "I've brought her here because not only does she not remember last night either, but she has also been acting odder than usual," she mused looking off in the distance while rubbing her chin in deep thought as the demoness just raised an eyebrow at her answer, now even more confused. After following the blonde clone to another room with a table and several chairs as sitting in one of them sat Passion, a much more attractive version of Raven, except wearing a purple cloak, skimpier outfit, longer wavier hair, dizzily eyes, fuller lips, and a much fuller curvaceous supermodel body and hergless figure. But what was really odd though, was that she looked tired and yet satisfied. "Oh no, that can't be good," Raven worryingly thought with a blush, meaning that what she thought has happened really did happen. "I'll be honest," started Knowledge once everyone sat down, or in Happy's case, stayed calm enough to listen. "I am not 100% certain about what happened or how it happened. But I do have a few theories," she informed since what was happening to them could have multiple causes. "Was it Trigon?" the original asked with slight worry, wondering if his influence managed to slip past her defenses, but while it was unlikely, it was still a possibility. "Either that or Passion took the reins again," the blonde bookworm sarcastically said, remembering the last time the Perplet took control as she went to Earth and flirted with a few guys who ended up in the hospital with blank drooling expressions as well crushed pelvises. "The memory you're looking for is here," she announced, refocusing on the task as she held a book with last night's time and date on it. "Obviously, I have not seen it, otherwise you would already know," she simply stated as the original Raven took the book from her emotions hands and held it, feeling scared and worried about what she will see. Taking a few deep breaths, she opened the book as the pages began telling last night's events. Flashback, the night before, Raven's POV. "To me, going out at night with my team was a common occurrence, as this was when the villains usually try and steal things, as we have gotten a call that someone had attacked an armored truck from one of the local banks, as the police were no match as them as the villain used his abilities to stop them. When we've arrived, I was genuinely surprised that it was a villain that we had never seen before, which was rare, but it does happen since I assumed that we'd be fighting the Hive again. This villain liked to call himself Dr. Light and much to my utter annoyance, liked to use puns about light as they were nearly as bad as Beast Boy's jokes, maybe even worse. I watched as he stood on top of the overturned truck and began speaking, "Your pathetic skills can't be outshined by the brilliances of Dr. Light," he declared as his hands glowed as he fired a beam of light directly towards me and the others, which we've all dodged with ease. Robin was the first to act as he jumped into the air throwing a bird orang as the walking lamp jumped away from the attack. "You're fast," he commented to the leader of our team as he brought his hands to the light bulb mechanism on his chest. "But I doubt you'll enjoy moving at the speed of light," he exclaimed, shooting another light beam, this time bigger and faster than the others, as it quickly slammed into the boy wonder. "Arg!" he cried out in pain as he was sent flying through the air, while Beast Boy attempted to run up behind Dr. Light, turning into a wolf, snarling as he tried to bite down on the villain. "A wolf is no threat when it's blind as a bat," the ape-faced looking man shouted, taking a weapon from his belt as he threw multiple glowing orbs at the changeling, which exploded into a bright light as they hit the ground, hindering his eyesight as he became blinded and disorientated. Flying down towards the villain, Starfire fired a barrage of starbolts, but they did nothing as the living glowstick created a barrier that absorbed her attacks before taking hold of an object from behind his back as he dropped his shield and threw the item, which landed directly underneath the alien princess as it activated. Spinning around as a thin veil of light appeared surrounding and encasing within a bubble, imprisoning her as her superior strength wasn't even putting a dent. Seeing a window of opportunity, Cyber gripped off a large piece of metal from the truck. "Watch yourself, lightweight," he shouted as he ran towards the villain. "Cause things are about to get heavy," he exclaimed as he swung his makeshift weapon down, just barely missing Dr. Light as he fell back at the last second. In retaliation, the living light bulb quickly fired another beam of light that hit Cyborg in the chest, with the attack barely affecting him, as he stood up laughing and raised his hands gathering energy as well, summoning another light attack. Only this time it was slightly different as it glowed electrical red as it became spherical before he threw at the former football star, before he could do anything as it exploded, somehow even encasing him in stone. What? Let me go. Cyborg shouted, completely confused by how it even happens as he struggled to break free. Now, if nobody minds, Dr. Light began saying while walking up to the stuck form of our robotic teammate. I'll be taking the gold. He stated, making his way towards the truck to claim his price. I mind, I said, getting the villain's attention as I began chanting. Azarath Metrians in thaw. I started only to be hit by one of Dr. Light's attacks, cancelling my concentration as I was sent skidding across the ground, grunting and growling quite hard while feeling something within me climbing towards the surface. The little advice I heard Dr. Light starting to say as he walked up and stood across from me. Find shorter magic words, he taunted, making me clench my teeth as I used my magic to throw a motorbike at him, only for him to blast the vehicle with ease, turning it into harmless pieces as small bits of debris bounced off of him, all while have a smug smirk on his face as he attacked me again. Hitting me with another beam of light. Can't believe I'm losing to a walking desk lamp. I mentally shouted in frustration as I flew away, only to once again be blasted in back as I crashed against the ground, pain spreading all throughout my body. You weak little bitch, getting your ass handed to you by a pathetic human. Let me show you how we demons deal with puny pests. My eyes widen as I heard anger raging from inside my head, holding and clenching myself as I can feel her taking control. Trying to calm myself down, I tried to warn the villain just as anger took over. Don't come any closer. I've warned, but it was too late as by demon's side took over. What's the matter, afraid of the light? He laughed mockingly as he was about to attack when anger suddenly jumped at him, all four of her eyes turning demonic red as she flew into the air, spreading open her cloak as horrifying black tendrils appeared from within as they flew at Dr. Light, who backed away in terror. No. He shouted out in terrified fright as the tendrils destroyed his suit as they grabbed hold of him. My suit. He cried as he desperately clawed at the ground as he was getting dragged towards the demoness. No. I surrender. He screamed as he begged was ignored. What's the matter, afraid of the dark? Haha, anger mocked as she laughed, enjoying the creams as this pathetic human continues to scream and beg as he was dragged and ensnared within her cloak, crying out in horror and terrified fear as she began her torture upon this weak little man. Robin, seeing what was happening, ran to his possessed friend. Raven, stop. He commanded, hoping to get through to her. The sound of the boy wonder's voice was enough to make anger gasp and snarled as I suddenly regained control of myself as I backed away and released as now traumatized Dr. Light as the man was now curled up in a fetal position on the ground as his suit and body appeared to have chewed up while his eyes were wide with horrified shock as his pupils were dilated, showing that he was truly afraid. It's okay. You're going to be alright, the Gotham sidekick gently soothed, trying to console the villain as he rambled to himself, begging for the darkness to stop. Beast Boy and Cyborg walked up to Raven, the changeling not even taking his eyes off the terrified man. Dude, Raven, what did you do? He questioned in concern, but I ignored him as I felt my control slipping as anger once again gained control as she turned and growled at him, making him step back in fear before settling down once more. Knowing that I had to get away, I quickly turned and ran, hoping to keep my friend safe. Safe from the monster that I truly am. I didn't know where I was running to, and I didn't care either. I can still feel anger trying everything to retake control as I was losing the will to keep her suppressed. Azarath Metrian Zinthos, I chanted, hoping it would help as I repeated the chant while running through an alleyway where I caught sight of a group of teenagers spray painting a wall with images and words. Seeing them made anger take control as our eyes turned demonic red once again as she grinned evilly before slowly stalking up to her prey. But once she was close enough though, she suddenly stopped. This present, she lowly growled as I could sense something close by. Whatever it was powerful. Uncontrollable. And intoxicatingly. Demonic. Whatever it was that anger was sensing, I could sense it too, and I knew what she was just about to go do. Without hesitation, my body left the group of teens as we flew to where the powerful energy was, so my demon side can make it hers, as we followed the source of the intoxicating power to an apartment building, as we flew up the side of the outer wall, until we found the apartment anger's target was in. Yes, soon, that strong demonic aura will be mine, I heard my dark half sadistically chuckle, while licking our teeth, which has turned sharp as she used our magic to teleport inside, where we were greeted by the sight of Naruto sleeping on the couch. Seeing her prey lying openly unprotected, I felt anger grinning a dark wicked grin at the opportunity as she floated and hovered her way towards him, all while licking her lips as we stood over him, as I felt the powerful demonic energy he was producing, as it was making our legs shake along with a burning sensation, building within our core as the power he was radiating felt so intoxicating. Just as she was about to do something, the blonde man's eyes suddenly snapped open as he jumped to his feet, surprising my demon half, as she floated back with a small snarl, as he stared at us with serious confusion clear on his face. "What are you doing here?" I heard him questioned, his tone demanding to know before suddenly gripping his head, as his eyes widened as they shifted from blue to demonic red, his pupils also taking a more slit-like appearance, as his form began changing slightly, as his whisker marks deepened as his teeth grew into fangs, along with his nails sharpening into claws. His body and muscles bulked and hardened as a pair of fox ears and 4 tails sprouted from his head tailbone. I could sense as he physically changed, so did his energy, as whatever he was doing to suppress failed as now, she could sense it all, and it was overpowering. Soon, he stopped struggling with himself before standing straight up and looked directly at us, and grinned a very big fanged grin, as I felt anger smirking back at him. "Suo, another demon stands before me, and quite a strong and attractive one too," I heard her say with a husky tone, as I felt her changing our body into our demon form, as our blue hair turned white, our ashen gray skin shifting to blood red, our feet becoming digitigrade making us slightly taller as our bust, hips, and rear became bigger and fuller, while our muscles also slightly grew and hardened with our leotard fitting against our frame like a second skin, as our thighs and legs were getting the most growth, as they swell and thicken with excess mass. While finally 2 sets of curved horns sprouted from out forehead as our 2 eyes swift into 4 as well turning fully yellow showing that my demon side was now fully in control as she cracked our neck and joints. "Now, to make you and your power mine and mine alone," she sexually snarled flexing our clawed hands since there were other ways to get what she wanted as they both quickly closed the distance and began to wildly make out as they torn each other's clothes off and flashback over, normal POV. Raven quickly snapped the book shut at that point, already knowing where the rest of her memory was going, as her face was glowing nova red as steam practically appeared from her ears, while passion had a giddy smile, looking as though she was drunk on something, while knowledge too has a blush of her own, but was mutter interesting every now and again, while happy just had a grin on her face. Like she always did. Taking a deep breath, the halfling sorceress tried and failed to compose herself. "Right, I think I know what happened." She began getting her bookworm self's undivided attention. Trigon's influence did cause that to happen, but that influence was gone by the time I found Naruto. She theorized before continuing. "I think when I sensed his energy, passion somehow took over and that happened." She disgruntledly stated, trying to fight back the burning hot blush on her face, as well the intense boiling heat building up within her core. "That does make sense," the yellow-wearing clone said with an agreeable nod. "But, what of this energy that this Naruto had?" She questioned, rubbing her chin in thought. It was definitely demonic in nature, but we could tell he was still human before seeing him change into a kitsune. Meaning that he could also be like us since that energy was independent and yet somehow still a part of him. She stated, making her outer self covers her face in despair upon realizing that she'd had sex with another demon. "His energy somehow made me react the way I did." Raven questioned with grumbled tone, now feeling troubled since she spent her entire life hating her demon side, but now has so many questions and fears since she never bothers to even study or learn about demon culture or customs. Looking at her original self with seriousness, knowledge began to speak. "I believe it would be best to go and speak with him at once," she instructed, since she doesn't have the heart to tell her that what happened between her and Naruto meant something much bigger has happened, as Happy was squirming within her seat, humming the sounds of wedding bells. Waking up in the real world, Raven sighed as she didn't want to go find Naruto and talk to him since she still felt terrible about what she did, especially after he was nice to her, but still needed answers. Biting her lip, she looked at the time and saw it was 1 in the morning, so she has a choice: either she could go in the morning, with her friends questioning her about what happened and where she was going. Or, she could leave now and go see him, but he was probably asleep and possibly mad at her. "Screw it," she muttered before teleporting away. Reappearing within an alleyway, the blue-haired demoness saw she was just next to Naruto's building as she was about to fly up, but decided against it and walked inside, while remembering what number he lived in, as she walked up to the door and raised her hand to knock, but stopped, for she couldn't bring herself to knock. "Why is my heart beating so fast?" she pondered, as for some reason her heart was beating rapidly as her mind betrayed her and forced her to remember the previous night before shaking her head as well, taking a deep breath and knocked. For a few moments, nothing happened, so she knocked again. This time, she heard a few footsteps before the door opened. As she looked up, see the surprise on Naruto's face upon seeing her. "Oh, I didn't think I would see you again so soon, or ever given what happened," he said before muttering the last part to himself as he looked away with a blush, having his own recollection about what happened yesterday. Choosing to ignore what he whispered, Raven looked down at the ground, rubbing her arm uncertainly before speaking. "We, need to talk," she said with an embarrassed blush dusting her cheeks. The whiskered blonde stared at her for a moment as he smiled. "Come on in, I'll make you some tea," he offered while hoping that there wouldn't be a repeat of what happened between them. "Thank you," Raven shyly accepted before stepping inside as she walked over to the couch and sat down, listening as he went to the kitchen and turned on the kettle. "I'm sorry," Naruto simply said with his back facing Raven, now wanting to look at her for what happened last night, figuring that she was here for an apology, surprising the indigo-haired titan, since she wasn't expecting to hear an apology from him. "I still don't remember what happened last night, but I feel responsible," he added with a hint of shame and regret in his tone as the kettle began whistling, meaning the tea was done. "I should be the one to apologize," the ashen-skinned demoness stated as the whiskered blonde poured her some tea as he slightly glanced at her but said nothing. "You were nice to me after what happened," she said, accepting the cup before staring down at the brownish liquid. "I tried to pretend that nothing happened. I left when you offered to talk without even saying goodbye," she mused, walking over towards the couch before sitting down as he sat down beside her. "It's a lot, everything that happened," she stated as she took a sip of tea before releasing a sigh. Naruto nodded at that as he stared aimlessly around his apartment. "I know," he spoke with a silence pause before breathing heavily. "Not remembering a thing, waking up next to a stranger that you don't even recognize, it intense," he stated since it has happened to him a few times as he began drinking his tea. "I actually remember," Raven suddenly said, surprising him greatly as he choked a little on his drink. "I remember everything, thanks to my abilities," she stated, taking a deep breath as she began to recount the night before as he listened closely to her words. "For some reason, my abilities have made me on edge lately, and I still don't know why. The other night, my team and I were fighting Dr. Light and I lost control," she began. "Since that night, anger began taking control." "Did you kill him?" the Uzumaki asked with a raised eyebrow, wondering what the connection between that and what happened last night was, since he had to do a few killings in his former life. His sudden question caused her eyes to widen at that before she frantically shook her head. "No. No. God no," she replied firmly, as well urgently. "We don't kill, but I'm afraid that I was close to doing that," she mentioned as he stayed silent, knowing that it must have been hard for her to admit that. "When I lost control, I gave into my anger. With my abilities, I hurt him physically and even mentally." She paused, remembering the horrified expression on Dr. Light's face as his entire body quivered in terror as she ignored anger's sadistic chuckle before continuing. "If it wasn't for my friends, I would have done more," she stated, only to hear her violent emotion cackle. "Admit it, it felt good watching that worm squirm, empowering even since the fear he was showing felt great." Haha, the sadistic emotion cackled in enjoyment, even if she's peeved since she didn't get to finish what she started. "Speaking of finishing, now's our chance to get revenge on this bastard. I'm a demoness who dominates, not one that gets dominated," she shrieked, wanting her outer self to give her control so she can show that Kitsune's place beneath her in terms of power, as well sexual. Taking another sip of tea to calm herself, the female titan continued. "I barely managed to get my senses back, but I could tell I was going to lose control again. I was also afraid that my friend saw me like that, so I ran away, hoping that I can do something," she told him, gripping her cup as she recalled that moment as it scared her. "But I couldn't, and I lost to my anger again. I was close to hurting a couple of innocent people," she trailed off, not wanting to even think about what anger could have possibly done. That moment, she'd taken full control of her body. Seeing that she was starting to hesitate, more so than she did when she'd admitted to nearly killing Dr. Light, Naruto spoke. "If you want to stop, then you can," he assured, letting her know that she doesn't have to continue if she doesn't want to. Shaking her head, the titan replied. "No, I was just trying to find the right words," she assured as she then looked directly into his eyes as she gained a slightly suspicious look. "Just as I was about to hurt those people, I sensed something. I don't know what it was, but I followed it and it led me you," she stated, causing the Uzumaki to widen his eyes slightly, but showed no other visible reaction. However, she had caught the slight twitch. "At first, you were normal, but after a few seconds you began to change physically," she added, getting him to nervously sweat. The blonde man started to counter her claim about him changing, but was quickly cut off. "I sense demonic energy from within you," the demonic sorceress interrupted, narrowing her eyes at him. "And somehow I was affected, and then we had we slept together," she exclaimed, catching herself, blushing slightly at not wanting able to say that word. "What are you?" she demanded, wanting to know, shifting slightly in case he tries something. Naruto could see that she was slowly getting ready to fight if she had to, not wanting that outcome, he quickly thought of what to do. What should I even say, he pondered, as he didn't want anyone to know about him or his past, and Raven was dangerously close to finding out, as there was no other possible way for her to learn anything about him, so if he lied or refused to answer, then there wasn't really anything she could do. But if she knew he lied or if he didn't answer, then she will no doubt press the issue. That entire thought process caused him to shake his head before looking directly into the blue tea's eyes. I am human, he answered truthfully, since he was human, just a human from another dimension, which caused his seal to mess up, making the Kyuubi completely absorbed within his body, but still humanish enough. As for that demonic energy, I have no idea what you're talking about. He lied as he knew what that energy was. Raven looked as though she didn't believe him for a few seconds. You had red eyes, those marks on your cheeks deepened, and I'm pretty sure you grew fangs and claws, as well as fur and tails. She firmly stated, listing off the physical changes he went under the other night. You don't remember any of this, and that has never happened to you before? She questioned, obviously interrogating him for answers. Naruto's mind quickly flashed back to the times he did have those features, but nonetheless shook his head. No, sorry, lived here for over a year, and nothing like that has ever happened. He stated, finishing his cup before heading towards the kitchen to fix himself another cup, as well avoid any more questions. Seeing him dodge her questions was making the young demon as frustrated. This is so frustrating. Why can't I tell if he's lying? She mentally scolds herself, since she can never tell if a person was lying or not, since her teammates' friends were terrible liars, before taking a few seconds to sip her tea, as well think of something, while wondering what her teammates would do in this situation. Beast Boy would be useless, since he would just annoy until either getting yelled to shut up or smacked across the face. Starfire would probably confuse her wording as well, stop pressing after being told it was either personal or private. Cyborg would just ask the same questions, though would also stop having been asked. And Robin would try and trick him to get an answer. She pondered before her thoughts on the boy from Gotham gave her a small idea. What do you do for a living? She suddenly asked, surprising Naruto as he glanced back at her with a raised eyebrow. Your apartment barely has anything in it, and yet you said that you've been here for a year. She explained, seeing how plain and simple the place looked. Not seeing any harm in the answering, the blonde Uzumaki spoke. I'm a writer. He simply said with a shrug, as his answer surprised her a little. I've written a few books before I moved here. As for my apartment, it was only temporary at first. I just haven't gotten around to doing anything with it yet. He explained, taking a sip of his tea as he leaned against the kitchen counter. You're a writer. Have I read anything you wrote? She questioned, wondering if she had maybe read anything he has written before. I highly doubt that, Naruto admitted with an amused look. My work is for adults only. My godfather was the first to write them, and I've continued since he passed. Although his were more smut-focused, mine are more stories-driven. He explained, having rewritten Jiraiya's plot less smut with details of some of his past missions, along with his own encounter with girls, minus the awkward moments like unknowingly groping Sasum and Raizetsu when both of them were disguised, or when Shizuka attacked him out of nowhere because of some decades-old grudge caused by the Toad Sage's perverted peeping. Raven blankly quirked an eyebrow, as those didn't sound like a series that she would be into, but it still caught her attention somehow. And the title? She asked so that she could know what the series was called, as she thought about reading one in the future. Originally, it was called Makeout Paradise, as those were my godfather's preferred title. My series is called True Confessions, as they are actually quite popular. He replied with a humble tone, since he didn't think that the book series would really get that much attention. Mentally taking note to try and find one of those books, the Halfling Titan asked another question, hoping he would slip something. Where did you live before moving here? She casually asked, hoping to at least learn where he'd originally lived before moving to Jump City. You know, if you're going to ask questions, then I think I should be allowed to ask some of my own. The whiskered man countered, seeing what she was doing, since, even though it was quite smart, but also completely obvious, since gathering information was always a necessary skill. Raven scowled, since hated talking about herself, so she definitely hated the idea of him asking her questions, but silently sighed since she wanted answers. Fine, she muttered with an unhappy tone. You ask a question, then I ask, happy? She offered, as he just shrugged, but the smirk he held showed his amusement. Fair enough. He said before asking her the same question she just asked him. Where are you from? I can't imagine that you learned your powers in a regular school or something. He questioned, since while he learned the basics from the academy, he had to learn a lot of his other skills in the field, even if they were at the worst possible moments during a mission. Releasing a sigh, the indigo-haired sorceress began to explain her original place of birth. I'm from a place called Azarath, which is in a different realm entirely. Raven answered simply and quickly before asking her last question once again. Where did you live before moving here? She repeated, wanting to know just exactly where he's from. So, she's from a different dimension as well. Interesting, Naruto mentally mused, happy to hear he wasn't the only one from a completely different dimension, as he answered her question, while avoiding mentioning Konoha and the elemental nations. I don't usually live in one place for too long. After a year or two, I move again. But, to answer your question, I last lived in Gotham City, but moved because there was too much going on there. He stated, getting her to nod, understanding that that particular city was dangerous. What was Azarath like? He asked, curious about her own homeworld. Remembering her childhood, Raven couldn't stop a small smile from forming on her usual blank lips. Azarath was beautiful. No other city or world could even compare to it. She said in reminiscing, making Naruto wondered why she said was but thought better than ask, since he could tell that something happened and it would be too personal for her to answer. Why do you move around? She asked, wanting to know why he continues to travel. Just haven't found the right place to call home yet, he simply said, taking a seat beside her on the couch before continuing. But maybe the city can change my mind. He paused with a small smile before looking towards her. What's your team like? He asked, wondering what her team was like since every team he'd been on was filled with so many characters and personalities, some good, some bad, and some he was better off not knowing, as a shiver ran through his spine, remembering Rock Lee and Might Guy's Sunset of Youth game jutsu. Even Raven herself had to admit that the question was a little odd, since you would no doubt figure out how the Titans were on TV, as they made no effort into hiding who they were, identity-wise at least, since they did everything they could to hide, but their personalities were fine to show off. Beast Boy is the clown of the team, thinks he's always funny when he's really just a headache, since he will do whatever to make you smile. Starfire is still adjusting to Earth's customs as annoyingly with her bubbly personality, but she still is a good friend. Cyborg loves to build, eat, and play video games with Beast Boy, as well loves throwing a celebration just for the fun of it. And Robin, as she began but trailed off, not really knowing what to even say about her leader. Well, he likes to think he's Batman, but with a smile sort of, she flatly said, since she thinks that the boy wonder had taken on a little too many of his mentor's traits. So, in other words, gets all serious most of the time and focuses on the mission at hand. The Uzumaki said with a quirked eyebrow, since the Dark Knight's protege sort of reminds him of Sasuke, except for the seeking revenge and obsession with power, along with being less moody emo. Pretty much, the demoness admitted with a sigh. But he will defend his friends no matter what, as he is a good leader. She stated as she went to take another sip of her tea, but saw that she had drunk all she had. Seeing the kettle that Naruto had placed on the coffee table, she reached to pick it up as he picked it up before handing it to her, their hands lightly grazing against each other. Raven froze at the minimum skin contact, not because of the touch itself, but because she suddenly sensed something, as it was the same energy from before, the one that he had denied knowing about, only this time, she knew it was coming from him. It may have been a small slip or something, but I defiantly sensed it from him. She thought, knowing that this very energy was demonic in nature, as it was already getting her emotions to react, a light blush dusting her cheeks as she heard passion's erotic moaning, followed by anger's snarling, timid and happiness's squealing, and even bravery's holler of excitement. What is it? Naruto asked, seeing her freeze a little, his sudden question snapping her from her thoughts, as she turned and glared at him lightly. I sense that energy again. She firmly said, making his eyes widen, since he thought he had it all suppressed. I know it came from you. Tell me, why do you have demonic energy? She demanded, with her magic flaring a little around her hands. The whiskered blonde looked as though he was debating with himself, but had a hard look on his face. I can't tell you, he said, shocking her with his dismissal. Why not? She exclaimed, standing up as her powers surged, causing their cups to shatter. I just can't. He loudly argued, also standing up before pacing around a little, as it looked as though he was trying to stay calm, but with great difficulty, since he wanted to keep it a secret, as he will do his best to make sure it stays his secret. This has nothing to do with you. He stated, not even looking back at her as his arms crossed over his chest. Nothing to do with me? Nothing to do with me, Raven yelled in shock and anger as her powers once again surged, this time destroying the bookshelf. This has everything to do with me. So, tell me why. She demanding as she stepped towards him and forced him to face her. Why is this so important to you? What the hell is driving you to learn something that you shouldn't? He angrily yelled, wondering why she was pressing this further than it already has gone. Without even thinking, she yelled out a reason. Because it was my first time. As soon as she shouted that sentence, the demonic halfling slapped her hands over her mouth, while her eyes were widened in shock. Well, he just stared at her with wide eyes, not knowing what to say to that, as seconds of awkward silence passed before she spoke, feeling ashamed that she had just said that. You were my first day and I need to know why this all happened. Please, she pleaded, wanting to know why she was feeling this way, and why was it causing her body and emotions to react. Naruto stared at her, feeling more ashamed than ever, as he still doesn't remember what happened that night, since he knew he wasn't in control of his actions, but he still felt guilty, but now even more so. "I'm sorry," he said in a whisper, looking away from her, whether it was guilt or shame, they don't even know. "This is something I just can't tell you," he said after a few seconds before opening the door. I think it's time you leave," he told her with a solemn voice as his hair shadowed his eyes. Raven felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and shame, as these were just some of the feelings she had at this very moment, as she could even feel her eyes watering at how mortifying this was for her, as well how he acted like it wasn't important. Clenching her fists, the ashen-skinned woman took a deep breath in an attempt to control the swarm of emotion she was feeling, but that still couldn't stop her powers from damaging the furniture around her, as she could see the man who'd taken her virginity, taking a step back from her. "That did it," she muttered to herself, seeing that he was now afraid of her, probably even ashamed that he slept with her. Hugging herself, the magical blue tea opened a portal beneath her feet without saying a word as she slowly sunk within it, as she took one last look towards Naruto, who looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Once she completely disappeared the portal closed, leaving the Uzumaki alone in his apartment once again as he sighed before slumping onto his couch, as he hated that he shouted at her, but he didn't want her to press on the issue. How was I supposed to know that it was her first time? Neither of us were in control of ourselves, and yet it happened. He said to himself, feeling really bad, horrible even, but he knew there was nothing that he could do. Maybe if she comes back, I'll apologize, he muttered to himself with uncertainty that she even wanted to come back. After a minute or two, he turned on the TV to try and distract himself, but the first thing to appear was the news about the Titans again, making him sigh as they just so happened to show a good picture of Raven. "This is going to be a long night," he groaned, slumping even further into his couch, wishing that this never even happened. I crept through the dark streets of Jump City along with Starfire, as an unsettlingly feeling built within her heart, since it has been 2 weeks since I had last spoken to Naruto after the incident, as I want to talk to him, but I just can't bring myself to. That night after our argument was horrible for me, since I can feel my emotions becoming more vocal in the short time I've spent with him than I ever had in years, as sadness and anger were the most vocal of them all, as it had gotten so bad that I spent a whole day meditating so that I could stay calm and keep my emotions under control. I also doesn't help that my teammates have been pestering me about why I've spent so long within my room, as their constant questioning was making me feel even more tense as I distanced myself from them, barely speaking to them as well. It also didn't help because the following week the HIV trio attacked us within our own base, as I could practically feel myself nearly losing control of my emotions again, as the trio managed to force each of us out of the tower, while Robin was still missing from our earlier encounter. I felt very relieved when he'd returned, as we've then stormed the tower, fighting the HIV trio to reclaim our home. But when I fought Jinx, I couldn't recall what happened, as Robin and the others were shocked when they found the self-claimed mistress of bad luck with multiple injuries, forcing them to take her to a hospital, while I stayed, locking myself in my room in fear of what I've done, since it was exactly what happened with Dr. Light. But now though, we were all in a different sort of danger, as just yesterday we found a box that was addressed to us. In hindsight, with their line of work, it would have been smart to have Cyborg scan the box for what was inside, or something like that, but instead we've opened the box without a care and found miniature puppets of ourselves, which even I've found creepy. I was the only one that had found this sudden development pretty strange, but the others loved them, thinking they were gifts from a fan, as the boys all had fun with their puppets, having them fight one another. Seeing how they were having fun with their puppets, Starfire had asked me if I wanted to have own puppets fight, but I wanted no part of whatever this was, since it was very strange how many puppet versions of ourselves just appear on our doorstep, as I just tossed my puppet away and walked back to my room. That same night, I was interrupted from my meditation as I suddenly felt an odd sensation, like something wasn't right. But I played it off as I was about to go back to meditating when I've heard our resident alien talking on the other side of my door. Suddenly, before either of us knew it, the guys came out of the nowhere and suddenly attacked us, as the fight didn't last long, as Cyborg managed to entrap us both within his mechanical arms, as, strangely enough, another puppet appeared, calling himself the Puppet King. As he had revealed some type of remote as well, holding the puppet versions of our teammates as they spoke through their puppet counterparts, pleading for help as I realized that their souls were removed from their own bodies. The Puppet King tried to take our souls, just as he had done to the others, but as I felt my soul being ripped out, I've managed to use a spell at the last moment that knocked everyone over, forcing the living puppet to let go of his remote. However, once my soul re-entered my body, it felt different as I felt like I was taller, along with my body feeling slender and more physically toned, as my beep and rear felt much more perky and firm, but now wasn't the time to question the sudden feelings as we had to escape. Once we've managed to hide in the closet, I turned on the light only to be shocked to see that I was looking at my body, quickly realizing that mine and Starfire's souls switched bodies, meaning I was now within Tamaranian's body, and that she was now inside mine. Before either of us could even get over our sudden shock of having switched bodies, the soulless bodies of our teammates had once again attacked us, but being in each other's bodies made us even more vulnerable because I can't seem to use Starfire's star bolts or fly, while her constant panicking was making my powers lash out, which, thankfully, managed to help us escape into the sewers. Which leads us here on the streets of Jump City. Normal POV. Right now, the body swap sorceress and alien princess trekked through the streets as the latter was panicking over the whole situation. Starfire, who was inside the halfling's body, was hyperventilating as she described everything that happened as she spoke. Raven, who was inside the Redette's body, noticed that because of their soul switching, their powers remained within their own bodies, since the more her alien teammate continued to panic, the more her powers began to destroy things around them. Quickly reaching over to her friend, the demoness spoke to her with a stern tone. Starfire, you have to calm down. My powers are driven by emotion, the more you feel the more energy you unleash. She bluntly informs her emotional teammate since she'll be trying attention to them. But what if they find us? She asked, referring to their teammates that were prisoners of the Puppet King. What if our friends are doomed? What if I am stuck looking like this forever? She whined, feeling extremely upset since their friends' soulless bodies were looking for them for their puppet master. We'll fix it, I don't know how, but we will rescue the boys and get our bodies back, Raven answered with slight annoyance as she reassures her emotional teammate before realizing what the princess just said. What's wrong with the way I look? She questioned with a raised eyebrow. Nothing. Starfire immediately said with a comedic sweat drop before suddenly stumbling slightly as she grabbed her head, feeling a little dizzy. What's wrong? The halfling asked with concern. The Tamaranian gave her a small smile. I believe I was just hungry. She answered, getting her moody friend to scoff with annoyance when they heard a bird's cry in the distance, drawing their attention to the sky as they looked up and immediately noticed a distinctive green bird circling high above them. It's friend Beast Boy. She announced, pointing her current ash-gray hand to their teammate. The soulless body of the changeling caught at them before diving down with his talons extended as the sorceress quickly seen the incoming attack. You mean zombie Beast Boy? Run. She exclaimed, grabbing her own hand as they both turned into an alley and ran as fast as they could. I think we lost him, she said, panting a little. But it won't be long until he finds us again. He may be an idiot, but he is good at tracking. She stated, since while their green skin was annoying, his animal-based powers are very good at getting the task done. I wish to fly. Starfire announced, jumping into the air and waving her arms around as if they were wings, but no matter how hard she tried, she would keep falling back onto the ground. As they walked through the alley, they described to each other how their powers worked. But Starfire's, Raven needed to try and feel happy or any other positive emotions, which was difficult for her as she had always suppressed her emotions. It was the same for her powers because the Tamaranian, a being who thrived on their emotions, needed to be calm and in control of said emotions. Turning a corner, they both heard a growling noise coming from behind, causing them both to freeze as they turned around to be confronted by a green tiger of all things, as their shape-shifting teammate was now stalking them. Not wanting to wait for the incoming attack, they both ran further down the alley. What do I have to feel to use starbolts? Raven quickly asked, wanting to know want to feel to use her alien teammate's powers. Righteous fury. Starfire answered, getting the demoness to groan in annoyance. Alien strength. She asked, since maybe she could use her teammate's more physically strong body to at least punch the changeling, something she'd actually be happy to do. Boundless confidence. The princess declared, flexing her arms since her people are of warrior culture. Never mind. The sorceress exclaimed with a growl as they turned a corner, narrowing, avoiding the tiger's pounce. Seeing a turn, Raven grabs Starfire and jumps out of the alley they were in, hiding against the wall as they were unnoticed by Beast Boy as he continued his path. But before either of them could breathe in relief, they saw a figure move in the shadows before appearing before them as they moved into the light, revealing Robin, as two metallic arms suddenly smashed their way through the wall behind them, making them jump in fright. With no other way in sight, Raven looked towards Starfire. If I can't fly, then you have to levitate, she started, only to be cut off by her bubbly teammate. Yes. The alien princess excitedly exclaimed, completely forgetting the danger they were in. Wait. You need to focus. She shouted, trying to tell her how to use her powers, but to no avail. Azrath Metrian Zinthos. The Tamaranian quickly shouted, launching herself high into the air with her fellow female titan, holding onto her hand as this, thankfully, gotten them away from their zombified teammates, but now there was another problem. I wish to stop. Please, tell me the way to stop. She yelled in a pleading tone as they were zooming over Jump City at impressive speeds. Look at the ground and imagine, Raven began explaining, but didn't even get to finish her sentence as they were falling towards the ground at the same speed as they slammed hard into a pile of garbage, which managed to break their fall. Remind me never to let you fly my body again, she sarcastically muttered as she pulled a banana peel off her head, her face having a disgusted sneer. Starfire groaned as she picked herself up as she sniffed her arm and reared her head back in disgust. Ugh, I smell like the breath of a Snervian blorkworm. Friend Raven, what are you? She began before her teammate quickly slapped her hand over her mouth while dragging her deeper into the garbage pile, just as Robin and Cyborg walked past them, clearly scouting out the area in search of them. Not seeing their targets, they both gave a zombie-like groan as they wandered off. Waiting until she was sure they were gone, the sorceress released a breath she didn't even know she was holding as she let herself relax a little. What are we going to do? Starfire asked in a whisper, clearly distraught over the whole situation. I don't know, she answered back, unsure how they can do anything when they aren't even in their own bodies. How are we going to save our friends? The princess questioned, wondering how they could possibly save their friends from the Puppet King's clutches. I don't know, the demoness answered, her tone and twitching brow showing clear irritation. How are we going to turn ourselves back to normal? The Tamaranian asked, wondering how they're going to return to their own bodies. I don't know. The sorceress shouted in anger and annoyance as she slammed a fist into the ground, which caused some cracks to appear. Starfire stayed quiet, not expecting the sudden anger that her usually calm and stoic teammates showed. Raven? Is that you? A voice familiar to one of them spoke from behind, which caught their attention. Turning towards the voice, Starfire was surprised to see a blonde male she didn't recognize staring right at her. Wait, how does he know friend Raven? She questioned within her thoughts, since she was also surprised that he seems familiar with her friend because, as far as she and the others knew, Raven didn't have any friends outside of the team, before realizing that the person was waiting on her to say something because he thought that she was Raven. Oh, hello. She nervously greeted with an awkward tone, making the mysterious boy stare, just as the real Raven slapped her own forehead, wishing this wasn't happening, because out of everything that was happening, this was something she did not need. You're not Raven, he said after an awkward silence, since the voice that came from the blue tea's mouth didn't sound anything like her, and her chakra signature was completely different. No, she isn't, Raven said with an edge in her voice, getting his attention as he turned his attention towards the orange-skinned Redet. What the hell are you doing here, Naruto? She asked with her arms crossed, clearly not happy to see him as she doesn't know that she was unknowingly squishing her perky and bubbly teammates' firmer boobs together within her skin-tight crop top. Naruto looked at Starfire's body, feeling a little aroused upon seeing a sexy toned babe with exotic green-colored eyes and orange-colored skin, along with a long scarlet-colored hair, dressed within a skimpy skin-tight purple top and miniskirt, but quickly shook those thoughts as he narrowed his eyes towards the other female titan, Starfire if he recalls. Now you sound like Raven. He said after a few seconds, emphasizing on the word you, while acting as though he doesn't hear the anger in her voice as the alien princess just stood still as she watched the exchange with interest. And why are you asking why I'm here? You know I live here. He stated with his arms crossed along with a raised brow. Blinking in response, the demonic halfling looked up and realized she and Starfire had landed at the back of the Uzumaki's apartment building. Of course, she muttered with a frown, wondering what the odds of her and Starfire landing behind this particular building were. Now, why are you in Starfire's body, and vice versa? He asked, motioning them to follow him as he began walking towards the building he lived in, wanting some answers about what was going on. Starfire followed after him, but saw that Raven was not, before going over to her friend, dragging the complaining sorceress inside. Raven sat upon a familiar couch with a frown as Starfire was looking around with curiosity clear on her face. Naruto walked into the room with a tray in his hand, holding 3 mugs and a teapot. So, are you going to answer my question? He asked once he set the mugs down for the girls. Without missing a beat, the demonic titan spoke. Are you finally going to answer mine? She asked back with clear annoyance in her tone as she crossed her arms and legs, unknowingly showing off more of her alien teammates' ample bust and toned legs. Said titan just awkwardly drank her tea as she watches, interested in what was happening, as she was beginning to wonder how they knew each other, as well as why her female friend was acting the way she was. But sensing the tension between the two, she decided to answer his question instead. We were attacked by the Puppet King, who has trapped our friends' souls into puppets. We do not know how he did this, but it had somehow caused us to switch bodies instead. She told him, which causes Raven to glare at her for answering, but said nothing. Kinda sounds like Ino's mind transfer jutsu, but more like a different version of it, the whiskered blonde idly thought as he took a sip of his tea, since it sounds much like the Yamanaka clan's bloodline, but with other people's souls instead of their minds. And I'm guessing you have no idea how to reverse this. He said, feeling like this so-called Puppet King has been planning this for a while. If we did, we would be doing something about it, wouldn't we? Raven snapped as she stood up glaring at him. How is it that you two know each other? Starfire finally asked after a few seconds, with the question having bugged her for a few minutes now, especially with how Raven was acting. That question caused the two to tense up with light blushes as they were unsure how to answer, especially Raven, since she still didn't want anyone on her team to know what happened, especially Starfire who was horrible at keeping secrets. "We met a few weeks ago," Naruto answered, surprising the sorceress at how willing he was to answer. "But we had a falling out recently," he added, getting her to scoff. "Falling out is putting it mildly," she said within her mind as she crossed her arms. "We're leaving," she announced, surprising the Tamaranian as she headed for the door. Letting out a heavy sigh, Naruto called out. "You're going to need my help," he said as soon as the demoness opened the door, getting her to freeze at what he just said. Turning her attention back towards the man that claimed her virginity. "Your help?" She spat out like she had to get rid of a bad taste in her mouth. "How could you possibly help?" she aggressively questioned as she unknowingly squeezed the doorknob with her teammate's alien strength. Starfire actually took a couple of steps back in fear, since she has never seen her friend this angry or emotional before, not in all the time that she's known her, before taking a glance at the oddly calm male, as she was now desperate to know what happened between them. "Neither of you can use the other's powers," he bluntly stated, catching their attention. "And how do you know that?" the demonic heroine questioned with a sneer as she placed her hands upon her, currently, slender hips. "If either of you knew how to control your abilities, then neither of you would involuntarily be in a pile of trash," he answered, making the two female titans blush, reminding them of their clash landing. "As much as you dislike the idea of me helping, you don't really have much of a choice. Besides, you need all the help you can get," he added, since neither of them could use the other's powers, since one requires them to be in touch with their emotions, while the other needs to be detached with their emotions. "What do you mean?" the alien princess asked in a confused, questioning tone. "Even though your teammates are trapped in puppets, their bodies are probably only using basic instinct with them being controlled. Even though they don't have their souls, their bodies know fully how to use their own abilities," he explained as he then gestured towards them. "But you two are different. Because you both swap souls, your instincts are all wrong, and you are basically fighting against your body's muscle memory. This gives the Puppet King a huge advantage. Plus, there's also the fact that you'll both be holding back as neither of you wants to hurt your friends." He added, since it was true, since neither wanted to truly hurt their teammates' friends, well, maybe one of them with a certain changeling. This causes the usual stoic sorceress to once again scoff. "And you think you can even the odds?" she asked incredulously, since she doubted how he could possibly help them if they couldn't even use their own powers. "I know how to fight, probably better than Robin as I've had more experience," he bluntly commented, since it seems that he'll have to come out and reveal his skills as a shinobi. That response actually caught her off guard. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She thought with a furrowed brow. Fought more than Robin. From what he told me, he was a rider. Also, he couldn't have been much older than me. So how would he have more experience fighting? It didn't make sense. She puzzled within her mind, since this raises more questions along with him having demonic energy. While she was thinking, she never noticed that the whiskered blonde had left the room, just leaving her and Starfire, who turned to look at her friend. "I believe we should accept his offer," she said, snapping out of her thoughts as she frowned at hearing that. "The Puppet King is controlling our friends, and I do not wish to hurt them," she reasoned, since even though their friends' bodies were hunting them down, she can't bring herself to hurt them. As much as the halfling wanted to deny everything that Naruto had said, she had to admit that what he said was true, since she also didn't want to hurt her friends, and she still couldn't use her alien teammates' powers. "Who would have thought that, after years of suppressing my emotions, it would be difficult to let them emotions take control?" she thought with an uncertain expression on her face. It was then the Uzumaki opened his door, showing that he changed his clothes as he was now wearing a dark gray form-fitting hoodie over a pair of black cargo pants, along with a pair of black boots as he wore the hood up, showing that it shadowed his hair and eyes, making it so that all you could see were his whisker marks, as he had a smirk on his lips. "I'm ready to go," he said with an assertive tone as he crossed his arms. "But we don't want your help," argued the demoness, completely forgetting that she had just mentally admitted that what he had said was true, not wanting to also admit that Starfire also had a point that they could use his help. Walking over to the door, he opened it and waited for them to leave. "Yeah, I figured you would try and not accept my help. But I thought this would be a lot easier," he stated as he gestured them to exit first. It was that moment that made Raven wished she had her powers back so that she could throw him around, but now seeing how both he and the princess were staring at her made her release a sigh in defeat before walking out of the apartment. "Do we have any way to find where the Puppet King is hiding?" Naruto asked as the group walked through an alley, checking corners in case of an ambush. "Why would he be hiding?" Raven snidely asked with her hands on her hips. "Because, from the way you described him, he's a puppet, a literal living puppet," He answered back sarcastically, snickering before coughing a little to ease his chuckle. It's unlikely that he'll be strong or anything, otherwise, he would have attacked you Titans head-on, instead of hiding in the dark when you were all asleep. He still sees you both as a threat, so he'll be somewhere else while your friends try to find you. He explained as that managed to shut the doubtful heroine up. It was just then that Starfire pointed towards the sky. Look. It's the friend Beast Boy. She called, a little too loudly, getting the two to look upward to where she was pointing as they saw a familiar to two of them, green-colored bird flying away. Without saying a word, the three ran after the changeling, which was not easy chasing after a bird, as the three kept having to turn corners through the alley and down a street, as there were a couple of times where the group actually managed to lose the avian, but they were quick to find him again, as it wasn't long until they managed to follow him to an abandoned theater. Seriously, Naruto flatly whispered as they all crouched on a roof to survey the area. Why is it that bad guys always go for abandoned places? That's like the first place anyone would look. He ranted with irritation at the stupidity of some of the villains in this world. Raven quickly shushed him as they all ducked, just as Beast Boy appeared from the theater as a Doberman, as they watched as the zombified hero sniffed around for over 10 minutes, before finally moving on to a different spot. Seeing their chance, the three ran to the theater as they hugged the wall. Even the windows are boarded up, it'll make too much noise if we tried to rip them off. The Uzumaki said, since trying to rip any of the boards off would immediately give away the element of surprise. Then getting to the roof is our best bet right now. The sorceress pointed out as she looked up. Hearing this, Starfire smiled as she put her hands on her body's shoulders. Now, do just as I instructed. Think of something joyful. She instructed as Naruto had to bite his tongue to keep a snarky comment to himself, since Joy and Raven didn't really mix, as he knew this from the small amount of time he had known her. As the Tamaranian began to list off things that make her happy, the demoness closed her eyes and, after a few seconds, began to fly with both human and alien holding her hands, as she managed to fly at a perfect pace, as they made it to the roof without anyone noticing. Once they landed, the princess clapped a little in joyful excitement. Very, very good. What was your joyful thought? She asked, wanting to know what joyful thought her normally expressionless friend had to use her body's flight ability. You don't want to know, Raven bluntly replied, glancing towards Naruto without the others noticing, since she was re-imaging that very night as her annoying bubbly teammate continued to pester until she sighed. Imagining life without a certain blonde. She said in half-truth with a blush dusty her cheeks, since while she didn't like their argument that following day, some of her emotions were pretty vocal about their opinions, with knowledge saying that she should give her a piece of her mind, with the rest agreeing, but for different reasons, since anger and bravery want to assert their dominance, while happiness and passion were in agreement for sex, while timidity was a little reluctant about him watching their boobs bounce around while riding his monster of a beep, along with the possibility of becoming impregnated. Starfire didn't seem to understand, but Naruto did as he frowned, finding it incredibly obvious it was meant for him as he sighed to himself. I knew she was angry, but does she actually hate me because of it? He thought as he walked over to a roof door with a padlock. Then again, I can't exactly blame her for hating me. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea for me to come along. He thought to himself, now regretting coming along as he picked the lock, as the Tamaranian was instructing the halfling on how to use her star bolts. Sneaking in through the rafters, they saw the puppet king standing in front of a cauldron filled with pure white flames. That can't be good. Naruto whispered just as the living marionette held the trapped titans above the fire, as they heard a monologue about how he'll destroy the puppets containing their souls, so that he'll have complete control of their bodies. Starfire, not wanting her friends to die, quickly acted and used Raven's powers to encase the puppets of their friends in magic, before bringing them to her. Unfortunately, this also brought the puppet king's attention to them. No. Bring them back to me. He ordered as the soulless bodies of Robin, Cyborg, and Beast Boy appeared from the shadows around him as they looked at their master before turning towards their targets. That can't be good, the shinobi commented just as Cyborg used his sonic cannon to fire at the rafters. Both female titans jumped away and were just able to fly, albeit with some difficulty, while the Uzumaki managed to use a rope and slide his way down to the ground. Thank you whoever invented gloves, he said as he shook his hands, thankful he didn't get rope burn, before reacting on instinct as he just managed to duck as the boy wonder jumped over him with his leg extended. The Titan leader spun in the air while taking out his bow staff as he swung it down onto him, who just blocked with his arms, taking this chance to reach out and grabbed his opponent's arm before bringing him in and kneeing him in the stomach as the zombified teen seemed to grunt as he stumbled back, holding his stomach. Nice to know you can still feel pain, even as a zombie for a wooden Chucky ripoff. Naruto quipped as the former sidekick then ran at him again and started to punch and kick as fast as he could as he simply blocked all the attacks with ease before sweeping his enslaved opponent off his feet as he brought his own foot into the air and slammed his heel into his stomach. The whiskered blonde watched carefully as Robin stopped moving for a moment before the possessed titan suddenly pulled out a boomerang, making him jump back as the handheld weapon barely sliced into his trousers. "It didn't cut me, but I'll need to be more careful." He mentally noted before kicking up the bow staff that the prodigy of Gotham's Dark Knight dropped as he spun it around a few times before taking a stance. Not waiting for another second, they both ran at each other. "Sorry." Starfire shouted as she used Raven's magic to throw crates and items at the processed beast boy as she was still holding on to her trapped friends as she flew, while the changeling dodged most of the projectiles but was hit a few times. Even though she knew that she wasn't fighting her friend, it still made her upset that she had to fight him all the same as the purple-clad boy changed into a hawk so that he could keep up with her in the air, weaving through wooden support beams and dodging boxes with his talons extended as he aimed at the alien princess as a crate was suddenly slammed into him, knocking him against a nearby wall, returning back to his original form. The green-skinned shapeshifter rubbed his head before staring at the Tamaranian again as he shifted into a large gorilla as he beat his chest and roared as he grabbed onto a rope and began to swing towards her, which surprised her since it should have been impossible given his current weight, easily bashing away anything that she thrown at him. Raven ducked as she avoided Cyborg swinging towards her as she cursed herself slightly since she couldn't do anything against her friend as she didn't have Starfire's strength nor Starbolt's since all she could do was fly, and even then, she had to concentrate to do that. "Come on, righteous fury," she muttered to herself, remembering what her extraterrestrial teammate said to her earlier, only to gasp as her back hit a wall before quickly flipping over the robotic human as he punched the wall where her head just was, as this gave her a quick moment to breathe as he seems to be stuck as she began to shake her fists, trying with all her might to will some starbolts only for nothing to happen. "Damn it," she shouted as she saw him rip his arm out of the wall and turn towards her, changing his arm into his sonic cannon as she quickly reacted as she jumped off the rafter they were on as the sonic blast barely missed her. However, just as the sorceress began to fly, the cybernetic titan reached over and grabbed her foot, swinging her against the ground with the air being knocked out of her as she laid on the floor, groaning in pain, before looking back up gasping as she saw him point his sonic cannon right at her head before he planted his foot onto her stomach. Cyborg was charging his hand-shifted weapon ready to blast the demoness's head, but was then suddenly knocked back a little just as Robin was thrown into him, looking worse for wear. Naruto landed next to Raven, offering a hand to help her up, but she just ignored him as she stood up. "Thanks." She grunted out, clearly not happy that he saved her, but was at least a little grateful. "Don't mention it." He simply replied as he held the bow staff over his shoulder as he had a smirk on his face, showing that he was enjoying this. "I haven't had this much fun in years," he commented, since it has been some time since he'd actually fought someone since arriving to this dimension. Standing up, the zombified boy wonder took out another two boomerang and threw them at the Uzumaki, who was about to use the bow staff to deflect them when they slammed into the ground in front of them as they then exploded into a cloud of grey smoke. Both Shinobi and Halfling covered their faces as the smoke spread, blocking their sight, giving the Titan's leader the opportunity to reach into his utility belt and bring out a disc before throwing it into the smoke as it exploded in a large ball of fire, while both zombified Titans went far enough so they were safe from the explosion. "I've had enough," Raven shouted in fury, getting their attention as they looked up as they saw that she was floating while holding Naruto by the back of his hood, her eyes glowing a fiery green as her right hand formed a starbolt. "Ah!" she shouted as she threw the bolt of energy at the wires that held the rafter up, forcing it to fall to the ground with both Titans on it. "Raven! Help!" Starfire shouted from the ground, getting their attention as both of them saw that she was being held by Beast Boy, who's still in the form of a gorilla, while just a few feet from them was the Puppet King, who held the trapped Titans as he ran towards the cauldron. Getting an idea, the sorceress lightly lifted the blonde, who seemed to understand what was about to happen. "No, not a good idea," he said just as she reeled him back and thrown him as hard as she could towards the little wooden villain. Naruto had his arms in front of him as he flew through the air at high speeds, as it only took a second for him to slam into the living puppet as he easily landed on his feet, having grabbed the Titan puppets in one hand while holding the controller in the other as he smirked as he tossed the controller into the flames behind him. "No!" the Puppet King shouted in horror as the source of his power was destroyed within the flames as his little wooden body began to shake violently as light erupted from his eyes and mouth as the puppets containing the trapped Titans glowed before their souls were released, quickly flying back into their original bodies, along with both Raven and Starfire gasping as their souls left their bodies before returning to their rightful ones. "I am me." The Redette cheered upon seeing that she was now back within her body as Beast Boy let her go so that she can embrace the blue tea in a hug. "And you are you," she added, feeling most joy that their souls have been returned to their rightful bodies. "And we're us." Cyborg cheered as he and the others were so happy to no longer be puppets. "No." Their small celebration was interrupted as they heard the Puppet King yelling as they turned to watch him trying to crawl towards the cauldron. The controller, without it I'm just a he began to say while reaching out towards the cauldron as he trailed off, as before becoming a lifeless puppet falling over just next to the cauldron. Good riddance. Beast Boy said dismissively as he changed into random animals, clearly happy to be back to normal. Let's celebrate. Cyborg shouted, bringing the girls into a hug. Our treat of course, you girls deserve it. He said thanking the two for saving them from being turned into firewood. The group walked towards the exit before Raven took a step back. I'll meet you all there, I just have to make sure of something. She told them as they turned towards her. Will you be alright? Robin asked, not keen on leaving a friend behind. Yes, the Puppet King was defeated and the cauldron flames extinguished themselves, but something could always happen. He said since everything has gotten crazier than his time in Gotham. The halfling nodded as the group left. Why were you hiding? She suddenly asked, turning towards Naruto as he stepped out from behind a pillar as he sent her a smirk. Why did you throw me to the Puppet King? You could clearly use Starfire's abilities. He countered not at all bothered being used as a human projectile since he'd done it all the time back home. You deserved it. She said with a glare since she was still upset about their fight a couple weeks ago. The Uzumaki sighed at that but couldn't blame her even he could admit that he did deserve it. You weren't happy with Starfire finding out about me. I doubt you wanted the rest of the team to know. Would have made questions neither of us want to answer. He said crossing his arms while looking upward since the other female titan was still somewhat clueless about them. The ashen-skinned girl stayed silent for a second before speaking. Why did you help us? You could have just let us leave like I wanted. We would have still beaten the Puppet King. In the end, we had enough control over our abilities that we would have won. She ranted since she didn't want to see nor talk to him after what happened. Naruto just stayed silent, not knowing what to say since he knew that she still disliked him, maybe even hated him, so saying something like he just wanted to help wouldn't work as he let out another sigh. I'm sorry. He simply said getting the blue tea to stare at him. Sorry? Sorry for what? She repeated with confusion as she placed her hands upon her hips. For everything. He answered catching her off guard as she raised an eyebrow. Well I may not have ruined your life, I wasn't in control of my actions, but I still hurt you deeply and I couldn't even give you a reason why. My past is something I wanted to keep secret because I am ashamed of it. I wanted it to die with me so that no one will know. He explained since while he knew it wasn't an excuse, he just didn't want to bring up so many painful memories. This really caught Raven's attention as she crossed her arms while continuing to stare at him. What kind of life did he have? She thought as she continues to listen. I'm still not ready to tell my story. He said, disappointing her. But, given enough time, I might be able to tell a friend. He added before extending a hand towards her, as this truly surprised her. She stared at his hand for what felt like hours since he was willing to be a friend to her, which, to her anyway, seems ridiculous. I can't forgive you for what happened, but I can at least understand that neither of us was in control of our actions that night if what you just said is true. She said as she then surprised him as she reached out and shook his hand. Thank you for your help, Naruto. She thanked him for helping with her usual monotone voice and stoic expression, but there was a slight unnoticeable smile on her lips. This got the whiskered blonde to smile a little before they separated. I'll see you around, Raven. You're free to come by my place if you ever just want to talk. He offered as she nodded, watching him walk out of the abandoned theater heading back towards his apartment. The young demoness honestly couldn't believe that he was willing to be her friend, but if this was a way to get answers, then she was also willing. Didn't he say he write books? She idly thought with a smirk as she opened up a portal and sunk into it as it closed behind her. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys, let me know in the comments section how was the story and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.